Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bible reading plan. We're in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 today. This is a really exciting one because Paul starts to describe his revelation of heaven, and that is amazing. And I just want to kind of touch on a few things here in this chapter. He says, he starts in third person right here because he's trying to distance himself from his deeds. But I'll show you in a minute why it's Paul talking about himself. He says, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. Okay, so there's this third heaven. You're telling me there are three heavens? I thought there was one heaven. I think the Muslims believe in 7 heavens or something like that. But breathe, there is only one heaven in the Bible. There's only one heavenly realm. But the Greeks would use this word heaven. It's Orinios, I believe, is how you say it. I'm not fluent on Greek, but Orinios is their word for heaven. And that word signifies 3 different things. It's a 3-part heaven, and context would tell people what part it was talking about. So the first part of this heaven, of this Orinios word, is talking about the atmosphere. So if you think in Genesis, when God made the birds of the air or the birds of the heavens, that is the atmosphere of earth. It's often called the heavens in the Bible. So Greeks would refer to that as heavens. And then the second one would be space. If you think of God when he's talking to Abraham, he says, your ancestors will number the stars in the heavens being space. There's a second use for that word. And then this third heaven is signifying the uttermost use of this word, which would be paradise. The third heaven would be the uttermost use of the word Orinios, which means paradise, which means heaven as we know it, heaven as we talk about it, heaven where God lives, where Christians go when we die to be with God. So Paul was taken up into heaven, as he is saying in this. And he says in verse 4, which I think is awesome, and he heard things that cannot be told, which man may not utter. And that is awesome. Imagine you being so close with God that he tells you something only you can know, something only for yourself. This makes me think in John's experience in Revelation, where God, he's writing all this stuff down that God is showing him, and God's like, write this down, and then he gets to a place and God says, no, don't write this down. This is just for you, John. How awesome would that be if God was showing you something and he said, this is just between us, this is just for you? Well, that's how close these guys were to God. He gave them personal revelation like that. And you would ask, why does God keep heaven from us from knowing what heaven is like? And I've heard it described as a boy who has broccoli on his plate, and then across the table from him is a whole quart or a whole gallon of ice cream, and he's struggling eating this broccoli because he's looking over and he's seeing this ice cream that he wants to eat so badly. And some people say, maybe God doesn't show us heaven because if we saw it, it would make kind of the joys of this world feel less than. And Paul's seeing that. If you look, you're seeing that he says in verse 7, where he changes from third person to first person, he says, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations. So to keep it from getting to his head, and to keep, the broccoli maybe tasting good, I'm not sure, but to keep those revelations going to his head, for Paul saying, I am better than you because I have seen heaven. He says, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. So we don't know what this is. Some people think it's a mental thing, a sinful thing, or an actual bodily ailment. I would guess it's a bodily ailment. We know that Paul didn't have good eyesight because in one of his letters he talks about writing with bold words because he can't see very well. So we don't know what the thorn in his flesh is really, but we see that God has given something to humble him, to keep him humble, so he can put life in perspective. He has to be weak. He has to trust God in his weakness. And I think that is awesome because he says in verse 9, this is where I'm going to end. It's so good. He says, my grace, but he said to me, God said to me, after he pleaded 3 times for him to take away this thorn, he said, God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, For my power is made perfect in weakness. Guys, that is so good to hear, that we don't have to be the ones to, pull our bootstraps up and, grit our teeth and go in by our own strength. No, God's power is made perfect in our weakness. That means reliance on Him is what we need to be doing. We don't need to be trying out of our own strength. I've heard this quote: if dependence is the goal, then weakness is the advantage. If our goal is to depend on God for everything, then we need to come in our weakness. We need to boast all the more in our weakness, because that's where God can work. And you see, God used David, who was a little shepherd boy, to run in and kill the giant Goliath, to just show that in our weakness he was made strong. His power is shown. And he used Moses, who had a stutter, a speech problem, to go in front of the most powerful man in the world at the time and say, "Let my people go." God uses weak people again and again and again to show His strength. So He can use you, He can use me in my weakness. That is the good news we have for today in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. I hope I shed some light on this and cleared up some confusion on this chapter. But thank you for joining me in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Hope to see you tomorrow, chapter 13, the last day of 2 Corinthians. Bye.